The system that we live under is called imperialism. Imperialism is capitalism in its monopolistic stage. It is the rule of the world by big banks and corporations that are headquartered in the Western countries, that rake in not just profits, but super profits by super exploiting countries around the world and keeping countries in poverty. Imperialism is capitalism in its monopolistic stage. It is capitalism in its decadent, moribund stage. And imperialism was defined by Vladimir Lenin as an international financial oligarchy, as the rule of the world by trusts, cartels, and syndicates, as the export of capital rather than the export of commodities. We don't export French fries all over the world. We export McDonald's all over the world. A few huge multinational corporations based in Western countries dominate the global economy. The export of capital, the dominance of banking over industry, the rule of high finance that carves out the world, partitions the world, creating spheres of influence, seizing raw materials. This system is called imperialism. And the essence of imperialism is holding back economic development. We can see many examples of what imperialism is. We look across the world. A great example of imperialism is Mexico. The people of Mexico have been growing their own food since the time long before Christopher Columbus ever showed up. But now, the majority of food in Mexico is imported from the United States. How did this happen? Why are the Mexican people not growing their own food? Why are they importing their food from American agribusiness corporations? Why? Because of something called the North American Free Trade Agreement that was passed by Bill Clinton. And now big, huge American multinationals like Kraft, like Monsanto, dominate Mexico's food market. And all the Mexican farmers, for the most part, have been wiped out. There's very little food production domestically in Mexico any longer. It's the similar story for Haiti. Development, in specific agricultural development in Mexico, has been wiped out. And Mexico is instead a captive market. American agribusiness corporations have been exported to Mexico, the export of capital. There is no Mexican agricultural sector to speak of. That is imperialism. Another great example of imperialism is Nigeria. Nigeria is a very wealthy country. It's a country in Africa with hundreds of millions of people living in it. And it has a huge amount of oil. The Niger Delta region is oil rich, huge amount of oil. But the people of Nigeria who live in this very, very wealthy country are very poor. They have a very low life expectancy. They have a low rate of literacy. They have a high infant mortality rate. They don't have paved roads. They don't have access to education. They don't have access to hospitals. Why? Well, because the oil of Nigeria is in the hands of ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron. It is not in the hands of the Nigerian people. There's a few Nigerian billionaires that function as middlemen for the Wall Street corporations, but it is the Western ultra monopolies that dominate the Nigerian oil market, the export of capital. And those corporations, those oil monopolies, are tied in with big banks, the dominance of finance. ExxonMobil is basically Chase Bank. Chase Bank and General Electric, together with ExxonMobil, make a monopoly, right? Chase Bank is the financial institution that is tied in with General Electric of the Morgan family and ExxonMobil of the Rockefeller family. BP, British Petroleum, that is basically HSBC Bank, the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation. Now, is that based in China? You would think it would be based in China, right? It's the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation. Well, it's based in London. HSBC Bank was set up by British bankers to dominate the economy of China in the 1800s. And it's based in London. The Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation, the HSBC Bank, is a British imperialist monopoly that was set up to dominate the Chinese economy. Doesn't dominate the Chinese economy anymore. Now it dominates the economy of the United States, of African countries, etc. There's other examples of imperialism that I could name. But the important thing about imperialism is to remember that it is not a policy. You do not engage in imperialism. You do not have imperialist policies. Imperialism is a system. It is a system. It is a relationship. It is a global financial apparatus. And it's been rising in the world for quite some time. It became dominant in the 1880s and 1890s. When people talk about imperialism, they are talking about India, that once had a vast textile apparatus. But the British went to India and they burned down the looms. They forced the people of India to import their cloth from Britain, from the British textile industry. Imperialism is why the British supported the Confederacy during the American Civil War. The British wanted their textile industry to dominate the world. And so they went to India and they burned down the textile looms, forced the people of India to import their cloth from Britain. And in America, they didn't want America to have its own textile industry. They wanted America to buy its textile products and its cloth from Britain. And they saw the slave plantation system of the South as a source of cheap cotton for their textile looms, for their textile industry. And so they sought to prevent the industrialization of the South. And they sought to maintain the Confederate slaveocracy. And that's why the British were very supportive of the Confederacy. One event that happened during our U.S. Civil War that we rarely hear about is that the U.S. military, the North, implemented a naval blockade of the South to prevent the South from exporting any of their cotton from their slave plantations. And the British were angry because they wanted that cheap cotton. And so they were planning to send their navy to the United States to break the blockade and enable the Confederates to keep sending their cheap cotton to Britain. And when it became clear the British were considering entering the war and sending their navy to break the blockade, Russia sent their navy to the New York City harbor, making clear that if the British were to get involved in the American Civil War, then the Russians would get involved on the other side. And the Russians supported Abraham Lincoln. And the British said, okay, we don't want to have a war with Russia. And as a result, the British did not get involved in the American Civil War. And the slaveholders were defeated. Very interesting story. And that points to the very history of the United States. Why was the United States formed as a country? The standard answer that you will get, why was the United States formed as a country, is because we want to have freedom, Caleb, because we want freedom. That's the standard answer. And nowadays, you'll get the woke answer. Instead of everyone saying the United States was formed because everyone just wanted to have freedom, you'll get the woke answer, which is the United States was formed because a bunch of racist white men were racist and white men and racist white men, racist. And that's not why the United States was formed either. Again, freedom was very important in founding the United States, absolutely. And yes, there are a lot of racist white men involved, slavery, etc. And yes, both those answers have truth in them, but they ultimately do not point to the reason that the United States was formed. The United States was formed for economic reasons, primarily. And those economic reasons boiled down to this. The British did not want economic development in the United States. The British saw the United States as part of a sea-based global empire. They did not want the United States to develop its own economy. They put crippling restrictions on the American economy to prevent it from developing. They wanted the United States to buy their products. They wanted the United States to dock British military ships in their harbors and facilitate British corporations dominating the global market. They did not want there to be an economy in the United States. And the founders of the United States, for a number of very different reasons, wanted a strong economy for the country. Now, some of them wanted that to be a slave economy. Some of them did not want it to be a slave economy. Alexander Hamilton was the economist who facilitated the building of lighthouses and the creation of the National Bank. Thomas Jefferson had his theory of the yeoman, which was just kind of a demagogic way to be a champion of the slave owners. And there's a whole lot of complicated history there. But for a wide variety of reasons, the people who started the United States wanted to have an economy in the United States. They did not want the United States to just be part of the British seaborne empire. And the United States began in defiance of the kind of economic dominance, the holding back of development that became imperialism. Lenin did not write about imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. He did not write about that until the 1880s, and industrial capitalism was still the dominant form. But the Dutch East India Company and the international slave trade, and there were various institutions that laid the basis for imperialism that were already emerging. In the lead up to the American Civil War, there was an economist named Henry Charles Carey, and he was against slavery. And Karl Marx said that Henry Charles Carey was the only economist in America with any value. And Henry Charles Carey wrote a book called The Harmony of Interests. And in that book, he ended by saying that there were two systems in the world. One system that was about keeping the world poor, impoverishing people, depopulating the world, driving down living standards. He said one system seeks to impoverish and starve the Hindu while reducing the rest of humanity to his level. And he said there is another system. And that system believes in advancing while expanding and equalizing the conditions of mankind. And Henry Charles Carey compared these two economic systems of trade. And he called one the English system and the other the American system. And what he was referring to when he pointed to the English system was what Lenin later described as imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. And it is that system that has become dominant in the world. The world is ruled by big banks. The world is ruled by forces that impoverish. The world is ruled by forces that hold back economic development and control global trade routes. And that system of imperialism is the greatest enemy of all mankind, of all humanity. Because the very nature of human beings is to grow and expand. And you can come at this from many different perspectives. Friedrich Engels, the close collaborator of Karl Marx, he wrote about it. And his very famous essay, The Role of Labor in the Transition from Ape to Man. And he wrote, all other species merely interact with their environment, but man forces the environment to serve him, masters it. And it is this difference that defines humanity. And if you look at other species, you will notice that they do not reinvent their relationship with nature. They do not force nature to serve them. They merely interact with it. But human beings force the environment to serve us. And we are constantly revolutionizing the nature through which we do it. And this is something that science has noted. And this is also something that spiritual voices have noted, right? You go back to the book of Genesis. What does it say? It says that man is to be fruitful, to multiply, to subdue the earth. Right? I mean, this is something unique about mankind. And we are constantly striving for a higher mode of production and constantly advancing. And human satisfaction and happiness comes from advancing, creating, interacting with the world around us in order to achieve something, in order to feel that we've improved the world around us, that we've made a difference. That is what it means to be a human being, is to do good, to improve things, to create, to expand. That is what the human experience is all about. Satisfaction in life comes from doing good. Satisfaction comes from achievement. Satisfaction comes from relations with others. These are universal truths that many, many people have realized and come to understand from many, many different angles. So what does all of this have to do with Kamala Harris? I'm talking about imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. I'm talking about the creative nature of mankind. I'm talking about the British Empire. I'm talking about a lot of things that may seem like they have nothing to do with the woman who could be our next president. Well, they have everything to do with the woman who could be our next president. And that's what I'm here tonight to tell you about. And to help you understand what this has to do with Kamala Harris, you need to understand a country called Libya. Until 2011, Libya was the most prosperous country on the African continent. There was not a single other country in Africa that had a higher life expectancy. They had wiped out illiteracy. They had built a modern university system. And in fact, Libya had created the world's largest irrigation system. It's a desert country, but with the great man-made river, Libya was greening the desert and starting to grow its own food. Oil is something that Libya has a lot of. And in 1969, in Libya, a leader of the military named Muammar Gaddafi, a man who grew up in poverty, a man who did not even know what his birthday was because his parents were Bedouin and they didn't have calendars, and he did not know what his birthday was. A man who went to school and slept in a mosque at nights because his parents lived in tents in the middle of the desert and there was no place for him to stay in the city, so he slept in a mosque every night when he was in school, and on the weekends he was in the desert living with his parents in a tent. A man from humble origins, a man of poverty, who joined the military at the time that Libya was a colony of the British, and they gave him military education. He learned to read and write. And he went to Britain and he got military education to be an officer in the Libyan military and started asking questions. Started asking questions. About why was Libya so poor when it had so much oil? And why were the Libyan people so impoverished? And why were the British expanding all over the world? And Gaddafi saw how in Egypt, the people of Egypt had broken free with President Abdel Nasser, and they built the world's largest the largest power plant in the Middle East, the Great Aswan Dam. They'd electrified the whole country. And they saw how the Soviet Union had lifted millions of people out of poverty and invented space travel. And so in 1969, the oil workers of Libya went on strike for higher wages. And there were protests and uprisings going on, and a secret society had been formed in the Libyan military. And Gaddafi, Muammar Gaddafi, a young man, was the leader of a secret society of patriotic military officers. And when they saw the workers out in the streets on strike, and they saw the people pouring out in the streets to support the oil workers, the young Muammar Gaddafi led his section of the military, the patriotic officers, to disobey their orders, to not obey the puppet king set up by the British Empire, but instead to march into the streets to back up the people and overthrow the puppet king of the British and establish Libya as an independent nation. And young Muammar Gaddafi, the leader of the Patriotic Officers Society, led the military to march into Tripoli and overthrow the illegitimate king, the puppet of the British Empire, and do the same thing that the Americans had done in 1776 and break free from imperialism and say, we will have development in Libya. The Libyan Revolution and Muammar Gaddafi fought against the British Empire, fought against policies of impoverishment, fought to take control of their natural resources, and they were successful. Muammar Gaddafi was the George Washington of Libya. He won independence for his homeland. And just like the American revolutionaries, he set up a national bank. And he took control of the oil and the natural resources, and they started selling that oil on the international markets, and they started building. And it was a very, very difficult thing to do in Libya. It was very, very difficult to build up the country. There was a lot of pressure put on Gaddafi. And so he said, you know what, I'm done. And he tried to quit. And he said, I am done with this. I quit. I'm tired. You guys are making my life too stressful. I want to go retire. I led the revolution. You guys can handle it from here. And the people of Libya wouldn't have it. And they went out and protested. And they demanded that Gaddafi, their leader, the leader of their revolution, come back. And there were protests all over Libya demanding that Gaddafi return to the presidency. So he did. He saw the people were demanding it, that he had been their leader. He had been their father. He had been on the radio talking to them all through the revolution. He had been the symbol of their national victory. He was the symbol of their pride in defeating the British Empire. And they went out and protested in big numbers, demanding that he not retire. So he came back. And Gaddafi, interestingly, he liked the Soviet Union. He liked China. He liked communist countries, but he maintained he was not a communist. He was a Muslim. He believed in God. He had Islamic faith, even though he believed in a secular government. And so he published the Green Book to explain his ideology after he returned to power. After the people wouldn't let him retire, he wrote this beautiful short book. And it's actually the first book we ever published as the Center for Political Innovation. And I really recommend you read it. It's very, very good. It's 3 chapters long. And this book is Gaddafi explaining how he sees the world. And he says that he is not a Marxist, because Marxism strives for the rule of the proletariat. And he says in Libya, we have farmers, we have Bedouin. Factory workers are a very small minority. Why would we have the factory workers rule over the rest of the country? And that he has a very socialistic and Marxist-influenced worldview, but he's also influenced by the Arab culture. He's also influenced by the African history, the African continent. He's also heavily influenced by Islam and the Islamic faith, and he developed his own ideology. And he published it in the Green Book. And they started building. And Libya built its people up and raised living standards very dramatically. And they were very generous with their wealth. They gave money not only to their own people. Everyone who got married got roughly $20,000 as a marriage bonus. Free college was given to everyone. Free healthcare was given to people. But in addition to that, when the Black Panthers of the United States were protesting for the rights of black people, I heard this story from Black Panthers. I actually heard this from an older person who had done work with the Black Panthers, is that one day in Chicago, they were just having a normal day at the Black Panther Party office. There was a knock on the door. They opened the door, and there was a man of Middle Eastern descent or North African descent, a man who didn't speak very much English. He was wearing a suit and tie. And he said, "This is for you. This is for you." And he gave them a suitcase. And then left, walked away. And they thought, what is this? They opened the suitcase. It was packed full of $100 bills. And that happened on many different occasions. The Black Panthers got a knock on their door, and there was somebody from the Libyan consulate or the Libyan mission who could just shove a suitcase full of $100 bills. And the same thing happened to the IRA, the Irish Republican Army. They got suitcases full of $100 bills as well. And so did the African National Congress, the people of South Africa fighting for their national liberation. And so did the Palestinians. Gaddafi used his money not just to make his own people wealthy, but also to make people around the world that were fighting against imperialism stronger. Gaddafi was a great anti-colonial hero. And in the early years of the 21st century, when the oil prices were surging because of Bush's invasion of Iraq, you had the highest oil prices in history, $120 a barrel. Libya was quite wealthy because their money came from oil. So Gaddafi announced that he was going to create an African bank, a bank for all of Africa that would loan money to African countries. And they were going to create an independent African currency for the African people. That this national bank, this international continental bank for Africa would have its own currency. For the African continent, to help African countries rise up from poverty. Libya was a bastion of resistance to imperialism. And of course, the US government labeled Libya a state sponsor of terrorism. They considered the IRA to be terrorists. They considered the Palestinians to be terrorists. Libya was giving them weapons and support and money, so clearly they had to be terrorists. The USA put sanctions on Libya. In the 1980s, Ronald Reagan bombed Libya, killed all kinds of civilians. One of the people who died was Gaddafi's own daughter, who was murdered by Ronald Reagan. But they resisted, and they continued to grow stronger as a country. Now you fast forward to 2011. 2011, Iraq had been invaded and destroyed and destabilized. 2011, Barack Obama is president. And Libya, it should be noted, Libya was prepared. If they invaded Libya, they had militias that were ready to fight them. But what happened in 2011? The Arab Spring was going on all across the Middle East. All of a sudden in Tunisia, which is a country that borders Libya, all of a sudden, a fruit seller who was angry about something to do with his license and felt there was corruption in the government lit himself on fire. Very tragic situation. A frustrated small businessman, a fruit salesman, lit himself on fire. And generally, Facebook, Twitter, they censor that kind of thing. They don't allow people, if people kill themselves, they eliminate that from Facebook, from Twitter, from YouTube. But for some reason in 2011, this fruit seller lit himself on fire, killed himself, and the video didn't get removed from Facebook. It went viral. It was all over Facebook and Twitter, and it was shown on Al Jazeera television and all over the Middle East. People were made aware that this fruit seller had lit himself on fire and called for people to revolt and rebel. And this suicide went viral, and all of a sudden people in Tunisia were out rioting in the streets, and eventually the Tunisian president stepped down. And in Egypt, a similar thing happened. Again, people were out protesting and rioting in the streets, and the Egyptian president stepped down. And all of a sudden, mainstream media, Al Jazeera, Facebook, Twitter were blasting everywhere. Revolt, protest. Now, Libya, right? Libya's in North Africa, near Tunisia, near Egypt. People in Libya protested also. And there were plenty of people in Libya that were frustrated, felt there was corruption in the country, didn't like some of the lack of civil liberties that they had, etc. And so there were some college students and others who went out and started protesting. And actually, Gaddafi's son, Saif Gaddafi went and met with the protesters and said he agreed with them. He agreed with them and brought some of the protesters onto television to talk, and they listened to the protesters. Most of the protesters, they didn't want instability. They certainly didn't want the imperialists to come back. They just were mad about corruption. They were mad about the suppression of civil liberties. They were mad about different things, the way they felt like some of the money was handed out nepotistically, etc. But then, as the protests were happening in Libya, just like every other Middle Eastern country, the Arab Spring, all of a sudden it went viral all over social media that Gaddafi had a Russian girlfriend. And there was a picture of a very beautiful woman from Russia. And it said that Gaddafi was having sex with this beautiful Russian woman. Now, I don't know if that was true or not. It may have been. I don't really know that much about Gaddafi's personal life. I know he was a bit of a party animal. I know that Islam forbids drinking alcohol, but he was known to have drinking parties. That his interpretation of the faith said it was okay to drink alcohol, I guess. And I know that he had many womanizers. People would make fun of how he had these beautiful women bodyguards, the green militia or whatever, that they guarded him. They were very sexy, beautiful women who were his personal bodyguards. But other than that, I don't really know if this is true or not. And I don't care. Could have been true. Might not have been true. I honestly have no clue, and I don't care. But who did care? Very conservative Muslims. Right? In Islam, you're only supposed to have sex with your wife. And in Islam, you can only marry another Muslim. But it went viral all over Twitter and Facebook and all over Al Jazeera that Gaddafi had a Russian girlfriend, a Russian mistress. I don't know if this is true. I haven't done the research, and I don't care. It may not have been true. The whole thing could have been completely made up. I don't care. And I don't know, and I don't care. But they started putting all over Twitter and Facebook and everywhere, Gaddafi has a Russian girlfriend. And so he's not a good Muslim. And all kinds of Al-Qaeda-linked terrorist forces started going to Libya. Wahhabi extremists and Muslim Brotherhood members started going to Libya. And they started protesting that Gaddafi was not a true Muslim, that Gaddafi was a false Muslim, that Gaddafi was a sinful sex pervert because he had this Muslim girlfriend, or this Russian girlfriend. And what the original protest movement among the college students got completely cemented, completely pushed aside, and usurped by this other movement that said that Gaddafi wasn't about corruption in the country. It wasn't about the grievances of young people. It was instead about Gaddafi wasn't a true Muslim. And Al-Qaeda-linked people and extremist fanatics from different countries started piling into Libya. People from Jordan, people from Saudi Arabia started piling into Libya to protest against Gaddafi for not being a true Muslim and demanding the creation of an Islamic government. Now, these forces were largely foreign, and they didn't really have much domestic support. So Gaddafi mobilized the population to go out and fight them. And these forces seized Benghazi. And Gaddafi prepared his military, and they said, we're going to retake Benghazi. We're going to crush these forces. And Gaddafi was so popular that he had trucks driving through the country just handing out guns to anyone who would take them, because he knew the people would point them in the right direction. Imagine our leaders are trying to take away our guns, but Gaddafi was so popular, he was handing guns to everybody. Alex Jones went to Libya, saw it for himself. He couldn't believe it. They were handing guns out to people on the streets. People were just taking guns. Hey, trucks going through the neighborhood. Hey, there's a bunch of terrorists trying to overthrow the government. Have some guns. And the whole population was given guns to protect themselves. Benghazi was the city that was seized by the extremists. And Gaddafi gave a speech and said, we're going to go house to house in Benghazi, and we're going to find the terrorists, and we're going to crush them. Well, Hillary Clinton was the U.S. Secretary of State at the time. And it turns out she was the one who arranged the whole social media phenomenon. Jared Andrew Cohen, formerly of the board of Google Alphabet, was working with Hillary Clinton, going back and forth between the U.S. State Department and the Silicon Valley tech monopolies to manipulate social media. The whole thing, the Arab Spring, was fake. It was staged from above. Al Jazeera, which is funded by the monarchy of Qatar and the government of Turkey, and social media, Twitter, Facebook, private corporations that were colluding with the State Department, they arranged the Arab Spring themselves. They made the Tunisia fruit seller go viral. They made the Egyptian revolution successful. And they were the ones who made it go viral that Gaddafi had a girlfriend who was not a Muslim. They're the ones that did that. And they created the crisis in Libya. And even though they poured all kinds of propaganda and piled all kinds of foreign fighters into the country, they still couldn't really overthrow Gaddafi. So what did they do? They sent people to the White House. Ben Rhodes describes this in his memoir of the Obama White House. Ben Rhodes, Samantha Power, Cass Sunstein, and Hillary Clinton, they all worked on Barack Obama. And they said, Barack Obama, you've got to send the military into Libya. You've got to invade Libya to stop the dictator. Barack Obama didn't want to do it because his predecessor had been George W. Bush, and he did not want to be known as the guy who overthrew a government. He didn't want to be known as a regime change war guy. He wouldn't do it. So they pulled the clip where Gaddafi said in his speech, we're going to go house to house. And they said, Barack, when Gaddafi says he's going to go house to house, that means he's going to kill everybody in Benghazi. That's not what Gaddafi meant. He meant they're going to find the terrorists. But they said, no, he's going to go house to house. He's going to kill everyone in Benghazi. He's going to wipe out an entire city, Barack. There's all kinds of fake news that was going around at this time. Susan Rice from the Obama administration, she claimed that Gaddafi was handing out Viagra to his soldiers so they could rape women. That was later proven to be fake, false. There were all kinds of videos floating around claiming that Gaddafi's military and Gaddafi's soldiers were doing all kinds of awful things. Later, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch came out and said, yeah, a lot of that stuff was just bullshit. But Susan Rice was saying it. Hillary Clinton was saying it. Barack Obama was being told it. And there were also things about the Libyan war that were true that they weren't telling us. The New York Times finally had to admit that one of the things that the anti-Gaddafi forces, the Islamic extremist and Western-backed forces that were trying to overthrow Gaddafi, one of the things that they would do was kill black Africans, right? So the Libyan people are North African, a little bit lighter skinned, but Gaddafi had a policy that any African, any black person, anyone from the continent of Africa who went to Libya, he would give them a job. And so there were many people from West Africa, from Southern Africa, who went to Libya and had jobs. They were, guest workers in the country. And they were very loyal to Gaddafi because they'd come from very impoverished countries and they'd been given a job by Gaddafi. And one thing that the anti-Gaddafi crowd would do is they would assume that these black, dark-skinned Africans were supporters of Gaddafi. And so when they would seize control of an area, they would go and grab all the black people and they would hang them and they would light their bodies on fire. Read about it. The New York Times admits this. They were lynching black people. But the news in the United States didn't mention that. But these revolutionaries in Libya that were being backed by the United States, that had U.S.-backed weapons, that were being glorified in American media, were lynching black people. The New York Times was finally forced to admit that, but it was largely covered up and not mentioned. So, with all this fake news going around that Gaddafi was giving out Viagra to women or to soldiers to rape women and all this false fake news going around, finally, Barack Obama gave in and the U.S. military started launching cruise missiles at Libya. And that ultimately was the turning point. But the Libyan people kept fighting. And it was still a long war because the Libyan people overwhelmingly supported Gaddafi. I worked for Ramsey Clark at the time, and Ramsey Clark said, if you go to Libya, you can see the people there very, very clearly support Gaddafi. Gaddafi had overwhelming popular support in Libya, but the cruise missiles and the bombs and the arms embargo and everything, finally, Libya was toppled and Libya was overthrown. And that was a long time ago. 2011 was a long time ago. It's been a long time since 2011. A lot has happened. But I'll tell you what hasn't happened. Life in Libya has not gotten better. It's still a complete mess. Libya is completely in shambles. There are open-air slave markets there. There are big sections of the country that don't have electricity. The whole country has just been devastated. And it's not gotten better. In over 10 years since then, what was once the most prosperous country on the African continent has been destroyed. But there's a clip of Hillary Clinton when she found out about Gaddafi. Gaddafi was ultimately captured and killed in just an evil, brutal way. I don't even want to go over the details of how Gaddafi was murdered. It was really one of the most gruesome, evil murders you can read about. But Hillary Clinton heard about Gaddafi being killed, and she got all gleeful and celebrated. Wow, she gets so excited. We came, we saw, he died. And she got all gleeful and was just celebrating it. And things in Libya have not improved. Life in Libya has gotten worse and worse and worse. People are drowning in the Mediterranean, dying, trying to get out of Libya because things are so bad. With the slave markets, with the human trafficking, with the terrorist groups. ISIS has set up shop, different terrorist groups. It was a disaster. The U.S. intervention in Libya has been a disaster. But that's not what matters, at least not to Hillary Clinton. What mattered to Hillary Clinton was that Gaddafi got punished. Gaddafi got killed. Very, very interesting. When Barack Obama was reelected in 2012, he got rid of Hillary Clinton as his Secretary of State. He replaced Hillary Clinton with John Kerry. And you'll notice that the second term of Barack Obama was very different than the first term in terms of foreign policy. Barack Obama's first term was the Arab Spring. It was starting the Syrian war. It was overthrowing Gaddafi. It was all kinds of things. But Barack Obama's second term, he signed the Iran nuclear deal. He established diplomatic relations with Cuba. He negotiated a peace treaty with the FARC in Colombia. John Kerry, the way he ran U.S. foreign policy was like the complete opposite of the way Hillary Clinton did. And when Barack Obama was leaving office, he said that his greatest regret as president was going into Libya. But as Barack Obama was leaving office, there was an article published in Foreign Affairs magazine And I quote that article in this book because it's very important. There was a special issue of Foreign Affairs magazine, the magazine of the Council on Foreign Relations, that was published. It was called The Power of Populism. Let me see if I can find the cover of it. I'll just put the cover on here because it's very important. Rarely do our leaders so blatantly and openly tell us what they believe. But Donald Trump had just won the election, and they were mad that Donald Trump had won the election. And so they decided to give us a piece of their minds. And they had Anne Marie Slaughter, who was the intellectual behind the Hillary Clinton State Department, the brains of the Hillary Clinton State Department. She wrote an essay for this special issue of Foreign Affairs magazine, The Power of Populism. All right, look at the cover there. It's basically saying that the Americans who voted for Trump are a bunch of ignorant hicks. That's the American Gothic painting, except it's got a MAGA hat, right? The power of populism. This is anger from the Council on Foreign Relations that Donald Trump won the election. And in this special issue of Foreign Affairs, you can find an article written by Anne Marie Slaughter. And Anne Marie Slaughter was Hillary Clinton's top advisor. Anne Marie Slaughter runs her own think tank. It's called New America. All right, you can read all about her profile. She is the CEO of New America. Right? You can read Anne Marie Slaughter. And Anne Marie Slaughter, she wrote this essay in New America. That's who she is. Where she basically spelled out what she believes. And she believes there is a fight in the world today between the open international system and populism. And she's very open about it. The open international system, free trade, freedom of information, free markets, and populism. And populism is Gaddafi. Populism is China. It's Russia, but it's also Donald Trump. It's also the government of Hungary. Populism is the enemy. Brexit is populism. And the way to fight populism is with the open international system and with control of information, with manipulating social media. And that the job of the United States is to foment a global revolution against populist governments in order to secure the open international system. Now, I started talking to you all about imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. And I talked about the English system versus the American system. And I talked about Lenin and the export of capital. We know what the open international system is. It's imperialism. It's the domination of the world by Western corporations and banks. And we know why governments like Gaddafi's Libya get targeted, because they have broken out of imperialism, because they are trying to raise their people up out of poverty. Well, Anne Marie Slaughter basically spelled it all out. In order to prop up the imperialist system, it is necessary to foment chaos and instability and spread revolution all over the world. Now, what does all of this have to do with Kamala Harris? Well, there was a meeting in the Hamptons, folks. Hillary Clinton was thinking that she would run for president again. Donald Trump kicked her ass in 2016, but she was still talking like she would run again. She was going to run for president again. Well, finally in 2020, it was made clear Hillary Clinton just couldn't run for president again. So there was a meeting in the Hamptons in Long Island, New York, where David Geffen attended, among other donors and supporters of Hillary Clinton. And at this meeting, they took a vote. And all of Hillary Clinton's biggest donors and supporters, all the people that had been working with Hillary Clinton and wanted Hillary Clinton to be in power, they all decided that they were going to put their money behind somebody else. And that somebody was Kamala Harris. I cite the very news articles. Page 6, which is a gossip column in New York, talked about it. I cite all the articles. This is fact. Kamala Harris was picked to continue Hillary Clinton's mission. Hillary Clinton did a huge amount of damage to the world. A huge amount of damage to the world when she was Secretary of State. The refugee crisis that resulted from the overthrow of the Libyan government, the refugee crisis that resulted from the chaos in Syria, the rise of the ISIS terrorists. What Hillary Clinton did as Secretary of State has cost millions of lives. Millions of lives. She overthrew the Honduran government in 2009, toppled Manuel Zelaya. There is a huge body count. Terrorist groups got stronger. People became refugees. Countries were destroyed. What Hillary Clinton did in her 4 years as Secretary of State was absolutely devastating. And there's a reason that Donald Trump was able to win the presidency. Donald Trump was able to win the presidency because there were so many people within the American establishment, within the military, within the policing agencies. There were so many people within the American government who said, you know, we just can't have this happen again. And Donald Trump got through and was able to win the 2016 elections because there were enough people who saw what the Arab Spring had done. And they said, we're not going to have it happen. And in 2020, Kamala Harris ran for president in the Democratic primary. And one of the most epic political knockouts in history was delivered by Tulsi Gabbard. Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard delivered the most epic political knockout by exposing Kamala Harris's record. And then from then on, Kamala Harris was a non-candidate in the 2020 election. In my book, I talk about how Joe Biden did everything he could to avoid picking her. Kamala Harris is not loved by the American people. They don't like her. They don't find her appealing. There's nothing about her that makes them want to have her as president. But she has some very, very powerful people who want her in office. Why? Because they want to finish what Hillary Clinton started. They look at all the refugees in the Middle East. They look at the chaos in Libya, the chaos in Syria, the chaos in Iraq, and they say it's just not enough. We want more of it. They want Hillary Clinton to finish the job. And the only way to finish the job of Hillary Clinton is to get her into the Oval Office. And when Hillary Clinton was running the State Department as Secretary of State, Barack Obama was there to kind of police her, to kind of hold it back. But if Kamala Harris is in the White House, she will make another Arab Spring, and she will devastate the world. And that is why I maintain that Kamala Harris is the main danger in the upcoming election. Now, let's be real. We'll be honest. Right? Center for Political Innovation, we don't campaign for anybody. Not everybody in the Center for Political Innovation agrees with me about this. And that's fine because we don't campaign for anybody. Right? We're not campaigning for one candidate or another. We don't endorse candidates. We don't have a particular political agenda. We seek to educate people. But my personal view is that Hillary Clinton Kamala Harris, the continuer of Hillary Clinton's mission, is the main danger in this election. I think Donald Trump winning is the better outcome that is possible. Now, that's what I believe. I think Donald Trump needs to win. I think Kamala Harris needs to lose. I think plenty of bad things could happen if Trump wins. But ultimately, I think that Kamala Harris is the main danger. She is the greater of two evils, if you want to put it that way. That is my opinion. And I think if you read my book, which has some pretty critical things about Trump in it as well, if you read my book, that comes across pretty effectively. Now, that said, at the end of the day, what really makes a difference is not the election. What really makes a difference is the balance of forces. So I want to tell you another story. This is a story about myself, but it's really a story of us. This is a story of where we came from as a movement. Because I will tell you, on October 20th, 2011, the day that Gaddafi died, I was in the Occupy Wall Street Park in New York City. I was there working with the International Action Center. And there was division among the Occupy Wall Street protesters about the death of Gaddafi. Some people were happy about it. The trust fund kids, the people who worked for big foundations, the people who are obsessed with LGBT politics, the Trotskyites, they were happy that Gaddafi was dead. There were a lot of people in that Occupy Wall Street Park that were not happy about it. A lot of them were Alex Jones fans. A lot of them were libertarians. A lot of them were Ron Paul supporters. A lot of them were into end the Fed and things like that. But they were not happy that Gaddafi was killed. And seeing that gap between the so-called left and the working class youth who were anti-establishment, seeing that the left wanted Gaddafi dead, but working class youth like me who came to New York City to live in a tent amid an economic crisis, they weren't happy about it. Seeing that gap was the beginning of a political journey that I have been on ever since. Because I supported Gaddafi, and I studied the Green Book. I studied the Green Book during the Libyan War, and I became more and more convinced that Gaddafi was a great anti-imperialist leader. And very few communist groups supported Gaddafi and supported Libya, and even those who did it in a weak way. And I couldn't believe this, because my understanding of capitalism and imperialism was that Gaddafi and his kind of government was exactly what we were fighting for. And the people trying to overthrow it were exactly what we were fighting against. I understood the problem of overproduction and the tendency of the falling rate of profit. I understood the monopolistic capitalist system and what it was, and I was again it, as they say. And even the small minority of communists who did defend Libya did so in a very, very reluctant way. A very, very reluctant way. It was very, very, very difficult for them. It was very, very difficult for them to defend Libya. But it wasn't difficult for me. I understood who was right and who was wrong. I got it. was not difficult for me. And the project that we now call the Center for Political Innovation, you can say that it started on that day. It took a long time to develop, and I had a lot of wild experiences in the coming years. And I went to Iran, went to Russia, went to Venezuela, went to Ecuador, went to global communist gatherings. You can say that it was a long journey, and I did a lot of self-work during that time. I examined my own motivations, why I had gotten involved in this movement to begin with. Why did I, of all people, some kid from a small town in Ohio, why did I end up becoming the spokesperson for Ramsey Clark? Why did I end up risking my life on a ship in Yemen? What was going on with me? I spent a long time on the psychoanalytic couch. I spent a long time in prayer trying to figure out why I did what I did. And I examined my own motivations. And I examined the motivations of the people around me. And there's a lot of things that went into what ultimately became our project, the Center for Political Innovation. And I love telling this story because every time we tell this story, we tell it a little bit differently and we gain more insights. And this is something that every person watching this should do. Not about your political organization necessarily, but about your own life. Write your own autobiography in your head. Tell your own life story. Come to understand where you came from, where you're going, why you're doing what you're doing, what motivates you. Learn to live in the past and the present and the future at the same time. This is something that's very important for everyone to do. In order to do political work in the real world, and to go out into the real world and do political work, you have to delve in to yourself. You have to go inward so you can go outward. You've got to know yourself so that you can really know the world around you. And I know myself to some degree or other. I'm learning to know myself every day a little bit better. But at the same time that I was wrangling with why the communist and socialist left had abandoned Libya and what was going on there, I was wrangling with myself and my own motivations. Why was I here? Why had I made these sacrifices? What was going on? I was examining spiritual questions. I rediscovered my Christian faith, my belief in God. I started to understand communist countries, why they're not going back to the Soviet way of doing things. For a long time, I've had it in my mind that, if we just went back to what Stalin did, everything would be right. Well, I don't think that anymore. And what we now call the Center for Political Innovation, what we now call this school of thought, this ideology that we have developed together called innovationism, is a result of a journey that I have been on with all of you for the past decade. And we have been on some amazing adventures. We have done some amazing things together. When I talk about examining my own motivations and why I do what I do, which is something that you all should be doing as well, something that anyone who wants to do serious political work should do. When I talk about that, that is what drives me to point out how dangerous Kamala Harris really is. Because if you look at Kamala Harris, you look at her life story, she has one motivation: vengeance. 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 That is what motivates Kamala Harris. Vengeance. Kamala Harris wants revenge. That little girl was me. Blocking DNA evidence to try and get Kevin Cooper killed. Covering up drug lab results that were false positive drug lab results. Making fun of people who say build more schools, less jails. Kamala Harris screams, "That little girl was me." The world's been unfair to her in her mind. And so it's totally okay to screw over other people. It's totally fine to imprison people when they didn't do it. It's totally fine to try and kill an innocent man, to block DNA evidence. It's totally fine to cover up that drug lab is turning over false positive results. It's totally fine to keep people locked up for no other reason than you need to use their cheap labor power, as her office argued when she was California State Attorney General. No, it's all fine. It's all totally fine because those other people don't matter. And the way she treated her staffers, the way people just kept quitting her office in big numbers, they just kept quitting because her office is a toxic atmosphere. The way she treats the people who works for her, the verbal abuse and the tearing people down. Right? Kamala Harris is a very, very dangerous person whose main drive in life is vengeance. And she is what you would call a synthetic personality. She has suffered a lot. She is angry. And she's damaged enough that people know how to push her buttons. And this is something that we have seen over and over and over again. We have seen this over and over and over again. We should have leaders that are smart and clear-headed and understand their own motivations, but we do not have that. They seek out damaged people. The Ivy League school system, right? American education is a joke. Let me just say that, right? You all think I'm smart. I appreciate that. You know, maybe you don't, but I feel like you wouldn't be watching this and listening to me if you didn't think I was smart. Well, the American education system doesn't think I'm smart. I'll tell you that much. Right? And when I was in college, I used to have a joke with some of my friends. So-and-so is so dumb, they got straight A's. Because it's true. When I was in college, the dumbest people I knew got straight A's in college. Why? Because they were people that could be programmed like a flute. You told them what to believe, and they believed it. They had not a creative thought in their head. That's how American education works. And the Ivy League schools are only available to those who are the most conforming and the most easy to manipulate and the most lacking in creativity. I learned this when I worked at the United Nations. I worked at the United Nations in the press corps. I was there with Press TV network from Iran, but I would be sitting next to people from ABC and NBC and Fox and CBS, and I would talk to these people, and I could not believe it. I couldn't believe it. These were supposed to be the smartest people in the country. These very competitive mainstream media jobs that paid them huge salaries. And they were the dumbest people I had ever met. They had no idea that there were two sides to things like the Libyan war, things like the Syrian conflict, things like Ukraine. They were just the most thought-conforming, easily manipulated people. And the way they vet people to become presidents of the United States is they go through the Ivy League schools. They go to Columbia, they go to Harvard, they go to Yale. And those schools are only for the people that have been totally proved already how thought-conforming they are. Right? There's a song, Gilbert and Sullivan. They have the song, "Now He is the Ruler of the Queen's Navy." I always voted at my party's call, and I never thought of thinking for myself at all. No, he never thought of thinking for himself at all. I thought so little they rewarded me by making me the ruler of the Queen's Navy. He thought so little they rewarded he by making him the ruler of the Queen's Navy. And that is basically the situation we're in. But it's worse than that, because they don't just seek out conforming, obedient people. That's what the main institutions do. I don't know if you've heard of, there's a secret society at Yale. This is interesting. There's a secret society at Yale called the Order of Skull and Bones. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's one of these weird, creepy secret societies at Yale. And George W. Bush was a member, and John Kerry was a member, and most prominent people that come out of Yale are members of the Order of Skull and Bones. And you look into the details of the Order of Skull and Bones, is one of the most creepy, disgusting, gross organizations you can read about. They have the dead body of a Native American child in their basement. They do all kinds of gross rituals. But it's an intelligence network. It's a way that they find people that they can work with. And what is one of the things that one has to do when you join the Order of Skull and Bones? Is they sit down with you and they get your sexual biography from you. Now, why would that be of interest? They sit down with you and they go in great detail over your sexual biography. I'm not even going to, I'll let you guess what they're asking you about. And what's that about? Well, they're looking to see how damaged you might be. They're looking to see how much shame you might have. It's not just about blackmail. It's part of it, probably. But it's also they're trying to understand you and the damage that you have and how they can push your buttons. So you're already at Yale. You're already somebody who the American education system has vetted to be a very obedient person. But now they're seeking out people among those who are very damaged. They're seeking out damaged people they can push their buttons with. This is the way our elite operate, because at the end of the day, it's not really our elite that run the country. The people that we get to vote for are just actors and actresses. The people who are really running things are the people around them that we never get to vote for. The weirdos like Samantha Power or Ben Rhodes or Anne-Marie Slaughter. That's who's really running the country. But they want the people who nominally have to make the decisions to be very, very damaged people. People that they know how to push their buttons. Kamala Harris and, I will say it, J.D. Vance are both people like that. This is very interesting, right? I've talked about Kamala Harris's autobiography, hates her father, glorifies her mother, how that's a very common biography. J.D. Vance, I told you all about J.D. Vance, and shout out to a friend of mine who also talked about J.D. Vance and tuned me into the life of J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is a lot like Bill Clinton. He's a lot like Barack Obama in that he didn't grow up with a father. He grew up with a single mom. And just like Barack Obama and just like Bill Clinton, his single mom married an abusive stepfather. And in J.D. Vance's case, it was multiple abusive stepfathers. And J.D. Vance is a very damaged person. You look at J.D. Vance. All right. He had one abusive stepfather who forced him to pierce his ears when he didn't want to. He had another abusive stepfather who then called him gay and fag and beat him up because his previous abusive stepfather had forced him to pierce his ears. J.D. Vance is a really damaged person. But he's a damaged person who went to Yale, who was vetted, and he went to Yale Law School. And then immediately after he came out of Yale Law School, they made him famous. He hadn't done anything yet. You read the opening to Hillbilly Elegy. He hadn't done anything yet. But they immediately decided, this is our guy. This is who we want to make famous. And they wrote Hillbilly Elegy, and they blasted him out there. J.D. Vance is our guy. Because he's damaged. Because they can push his buttons. And he went to Yale School of Law. I don't know if he was in Skull and Bones or not, but he's a damaged person. And they found him and they said, this is a damaged guy. And they said, we want this guy. We know what he said about Donald Trump. He compared Donald Trump to Hitler at one point. And he very much, you read his Hillbilly Elegy, he hates white working people. The reason that they're poor is because they're all stupid and racist. Right? J.D. Vance is a completely manufactured person. He's one of these damaged, manufactured people, just like Kamala Harris. Donald Trump, on the other hand, for all of his issues, Donald Trump is Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a self-made, I shouldn't say self-made, he's a father-made man. Donald Trump was not created by the American elite necessarily. Donald Trump worked his way through life being Donald Trump. He has his own issues and all of that, but he was a lot of things before he became president, and he's not somebody who's been vetted for the American elite. Donald Trump is a child of wealth. Donald Trump is a privileged guy, a product of nepotism, etc. But Donald Trump is Donald Trump. And Donald Trump wants to be remembered as Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is not somebody they've been able to manipulate and work on, who was selected to be president from their system for finding damaged people they can manipulate. That's not who Donald Trump is. Donald Trump is Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump can go in very bad directions. I think Donald Trump could also go in good directions, depending on the balance of forces, because this is the main point, right? This is the main point, and I'm going to say it again. What does this shirt say? Shout out to David Fox, who gave it to me. Proud to be Union, right? At the end of the day, what really makes the difference is the balance of forces. It's not, at the end of the day, about who gets elected. That's important to some degree or other. It's not unimportant. What matters is the balance of forces. Richard Nixon did amazing progressive reforms for the working class because the balance of forces was in our favor. Bill Clinton did awful things that made life worse for working people because the balance of forces was not in our favor. What matters is the organization. We need an anti-imperialist movement in this country. We need a movement of people that are dedicated to building up an economy beyond the rule of Wall Street and London, to returning to the original purpose of the United States, which was to have economic development, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the pursuit of raising living standards, the pursuit of having children, the pursuit of having a higher living standard and a higher life expectancy, the pursuit of inventing and advancing technology. The purpose of the United States, despite all the bad things, slavery, colonialism, beside all of that, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And how do you pursue happiness? The only way you can pursue happiness is to be creative, is to be a creator, is to build. You find satisfaction by building. You find satisfaction by constructing. You find satisfaction by engaging in creative work, by making the world a better place. That is how you can truly pursue happiness. You're not going to find happiness through drugs. You're not going to find happiness through pornography. You're not going to find happiness through harming other people, as much as Kamala Harris has tried. The only way that true happiness can be achieved is by engaging in godlike creative work and by engaging in love. You will find happiness by being able to love other people. If you can experience the joy of loving another person, not necessarily in a romantic way, but in the way that a teacher might love their student, in a way that a parent might love their child, in the way that people struggling for justice alongside each other and joining arm in arm can find love. And the way that Martin Luther King Jr. and the people who marched with him loved each other as they made great sacrifices for the cause of justice. You can find that kind of love. And you can create the way Leonardo da Vinci created, or the way Beethoven created, the way some of the greatest writers and poets, the way Shakespeare created. That is what happiness is about. That is how you can pursue happiness. If you want to find happiness, it comes from love and comradeship, and it comes from creativity, the pursuit of happiness. And that is the purpose of America. America was founded as a country. It said you have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We believe in growth. We believe in development. It was a rejection of the British Empire and the forces that said humanity's gone too far. There's too many people in the world. That's what America was formed to oppose. We are people who love creative power. And the capitalist mode of production, the rule of profits, has gotten to the point that it impedes the pursuit of happiness. And so, it is our duty to rescue America from capitalism and imperialism. We must build a movement of the American working class, of the American people, to rescue our country from the nightmare of the decaying imperialist international financial system. We need America to be reborn with a society that puts human need before the profits of a wealthy few, that helps all the American people to find the kind of happiness we are describing here, the ability to love others, the ability to create and build and construct, right? That should be the right of every person. We need a government that's job is facilitating that and bringing out that genuine, loving creativity in all of the people. That is what we need. We need a government that controls the banks and the factories and the industries and organizes the economy to unleash the creative power and the energy of all the people so that we can march forward and create more wealth and abundance than ever before. That is what we need. We need a government that serves the people, a government that makes us better, not stupider. I can imagine a government that would get rid of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and would design social media apps to make us smarter, make us more physically fit, make us more motivated in our life, make our kids have better self-esteem. Imagine that. We had a social media app that everybody was on that made them better. Didn't make them worse, but made them better. Imagine that. Imagine that we had a government that was hiring young people to go out and build high-speed railway. Imagine that we had a government that was using the oil and the natural resources and the natural wealth to make a stronger country. That's the kind of government we need. A government of action that fights for working families. We need a government of action that fights for working families and battles against the big monopolies and battles against this global financial system that is destroying people's lives. That's what we need. And we need a network of people who know that we need it. A network of people who understand that our mission is to come together and rescue our country and come together and demand a government of action that fights for working families. That is what we need more than anything. We need a network of people that are committed to the project of rescuing our country, breaking out of imperialism, and rebuilding America to be part of the new emerging global economy centered around Russia and China, to reject the dying imperialist capitalist monopoly order, and to rebuild itself. And this is the innovationist school of thought. And this is the application of communism and socialism that I accept. I reject the destructive woke part, and I embrace the constructive, optimistic, economic part. Right? This is what I'm for. And if you want to work with me to help carry it out, all power to you.